Okay, so it is my pleasure to welcome Bryan Hale to this session, and he is going to be telling us about framing for blended and remote learning. Take it away, Bryan.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I am Brian. I am presenting today from a rural part of South Korea where I'm a public high school teacher. And I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges that we've faced doing online and remotes and maybe blended teaching this year. So first, let me share. Uh, okay. Can you guys see that? Can I get a thumb? Okay, everyone can see that. So I'd like to begin by mentioning some of the briefs that I know that teachers have received this year. By brief, I mean their school or institute has said, okay, we're going online or we're going remote and it's going to be like this. So I actually know some teachers who have been told you can only make worksheets. Their school has said, we're very sorry. There's just no time for you as the English teacher or the conversation teacher to have any interaction or contact with students. Please make some worksheets and we'll send those to the students' houses and maybe they'll do them. So I think that's a very tough brief to work with. Something that's a little less extreme, but still lacking real interaction and contact with students is being told you can just make videos. So I know a lot of, especially elementary school teachers, had to do this year. And often they didn't really know what was happening with the videos. So they were trying to make very engaging and educational videos, but they weren't sure like what are students and what are their parents being told to do with these videos. So again, I think it's a fairly tough brief. I think even things that are a little bit less extreme still are very challenging. For example, I think Zoom has been held up as the ideal this year, but often there are kind of institutional restrictions, like maybe being told you can't require students to turn on their cameras or microphones. So breakout rooms are wonderful, but it can still be difficult to translate communicative language lessons into those kind of contexts. And I think a lot of teachers have been told, okay, our LMS is this, please prepare all your content and upload it right now. And I think there's often a focus on content and on technology and not very much discussion about pedagogy and learning experiences. As a bit of a reflection on what's missing in these scenarios, I want to tell a little bit of a story about my in-person classroom. So this semester, I'm lucky enough to be back teaching in the physical classroom at my high school. And I was trying to think of an example to discuss that about the benefits of in-person classroom teaching. And on Friday afternoon, I taught my last period Friday teenage boys who are always very rowdy and very, very ready for the weekend. And I thought they were a good example because they have they're they're quite a challenge to teach last period on a Friday, but they've developed this little ritual where during break time at the beginning, before the lesson begins, they come into the classroom and they go to the teacher computer and they start searching for images or videos of gorillas or chimpanzees or baboons. And the running joke is they will search and say, teacher, teacher, this is Jihoon, very big, very scary. And then Jihoon will come and grab the computer and search and say, no, 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 this is Mino, this is very stupid. And um, they get a lot of humor out of that. But it's kind of useful to me because it's kind of a spontaneous way to start, and they're starting to use English before the lesson even begins. Their ulterior motive is they want to delay the start of the lesson. They want to waste some time. But my tricksy thing I can do as teacher is, if I'm quick on my feet, is I can actually start the lesson before they realize. For example, if we're going to be writing some connected sentences, if actually they have already started giving me some connected sentences, I can be like, aha, I tricked you, the lesson is already underway. So if we think about all of the things that are useful there, we could list a whole bunch of technical things that are missing in online or remote teaching. and we could try to replace those technical things one by one. But I think that's a really big ask. And if your brief is you can only do worksheets or you can only just send out videos without interaction, really you can't replace each thing one by one. So it might be useful to look at what are the underlying processes that are so productive there. And so one idea I have, okay, so I think if we don't have a classroom, if we're being asked to teach without our physical classroom, maybe we need to ask, well, what is a classroom? What is it doing for us? And one idea I have about what a classroom is doing for us is that it's useful as a frame. So classroom is really just a kind of boundary. It's a physical, but also a symbolic container for learning experiences. And generally in social theory, the idea of frames has become quite fundamental because of the way that physical or symbolic delineation frames our experiences and even our thoughts and cognition. And so this goes back to Bateson, who talked about play frames and how play frames help metacognition. So when children, for example, play hospital, that's really useful to their metacognition because they have to think about, well, what's a hospital, who's there, what do doctors and nurses do in hospital? And also it's metalinguistic because they might think about how does a doctor talk? What kind of language does a doctor use? So the frame is not a static thing. It's ambiguous. It has to be kind of negotiated and reinterpreted all the time. So that's really productive. And okay, I want to give a little bit of a puzzle quickly. This also comes from Bateson. So here is a box. Every statement in this box is a lie. Bryan loves gorillas. Bryan hates gorillas. So I want you to think about whether the first sentence is true or false. And I think there's only a few of us. Maybe you could just unmute and tell me your answer. Is the first sentence true or false? Any answers?
True.
Anyone else? I'm checking chat. I have done this. I've given this riddle to other teachers and I got a real mix of answers. So the tricksy thing here is that the first, the first sentence is trying to be part of the frame itself. So that creates the kind of meta layer that might set off social or emotional or psychological processes. So actually, you were wrong, it's false. The reason it's false is because the other choice isn't every statement is the truth. The other choice is the box is a mixture of truth and lies. So logically, the puzzle is a little bit boring. But the point of this puzzle is maybe you thought about, oh, who is this Bryan guy? Is he a guy who loves gorillas or hates them? Or does gorilla mean his students? So if you had any of those kind of thoughts, then the puzzle did what it was supposed to do. The extra layer, the kind of ambiguousness. Ooh. Oh, I have mute power. Wow. Okay, the ambiguity hopefully was productive. So I think actually classrooms have this kind of productive ambiguity. So a lesson, is this part of the lesson? Maybe with the example I gave about the students and their gorilla and chimpanzee videos, tricking them into starting the lesson, actually that's productive, not just as a classroom management thing, but maybe also to their thinking processes. And teacher-student relationships might also be a kind of frame. And I think in teacher-centered and more traditional classrooms, this is sometimes a positive aspect of those classrooms that teachers focused on communicative language teaching might kind of neglect to notice. Actually, sometimes teacher-centeredness, benevolent teacher-centeredness can be helpful and productive. So also double frame context. So the point of the frame is the edges of the frame. That's where everything happens. So for example, the story I told was happening at the beginning of the lesson. So maybe that was part of what was encouraging the spontaneity, because that's the like entry and exit points there. That's where students can kind of influence things and change things. And also they were kind of, there was ambiguity about who I was. Was I a teacher? Was I just this strange foreigner who they were trying to get a rise out of? This sometimes could be also be called liminality. So this is getting a little theoretical, but the theory of liminality in anthropology talks about how this is where new culture and new possibilities are generated, kind of at the edges and the little in-between spots in cultural systems. And what I was saying about traditional classrooms having some benefits, Bannink agrees with that. She thinks that the traditional classroom can be a little bit paradoxically authentic, and teachers are often getting a lot of mileage out of that kind of paradoxical frame of the teacher-centered classroom. I'm going to skip ahead because I'm already using a lot of time. I think Hadfield and Clanfield have a book called Interaction Online, where they list some principles of ideal online communicative teaching. And I have the principles here. I really like their book. It's one of my favorite books about online teaching, and I think their principles are great. I think what's so helpful about their principles, actually, it's also a framing thing. So if there's a goal or a closure point to some kind of online project or online task, then that's the productive frame that students are thinking through all of the time. I think maybe, though, we have to be a little bit wary of communicative language teaching sometimes. When communicative language teaching works in classrooms, we might neglect that actually a lot of what's going on is about the classroom frame, and it's more complex than just, okay, here's a scenario for you to role play. We have to remember that all of the classroom complexity is going on around that. So if we are being asked to change and leave the classroom and do some kind of online or remote teaching, maybe we need to think of some other examples of frames. So I've already mentioned play, which was Bateson's original example. So during play, players are asking, is this part real or it's pretend? And that's doing a lot of work. Also, stories are a kind of frame. So readers might be asking, where is this story going, or how is it going to end? And I think journeys or quests are a kind of frame too. We might ask, are we on track? Are we complete? And also mysteries. What will be revealed? I think the gift packaging itself is a kind of frame, an ambiguous frame. Is the packaging a part of the gift? Is it a part of the inside or the outside? It's a little bit ambiguous. So if we are kind of taking these frame processes and doing them online or blended away from the physical classroom, something that is not an interpretive frame, like I've been talking about, is just these are the pages you have to do and the rest are the pages you don't have to do. In fact, that's the exact opposite of this kind of interpretive frame. That's exactly what doesn't stimulate thought. But there could be some teacher-centered frames, like maybe your teacher-centered content that you're just delivering out could have some kind of story or mystery about it. And if there's an opportunity to be a little more student-centered or having students be independent, maybe there could be puzzles or quests or games. And maybe we could break down performer audience boundaries a little bit, even if we're just delivering content. So I'm gonna check our time. How are we going? Oh, I've spoken a little bit too long, like I thought that I would. Let me barrel through my answer to this, which is the correct answer. No, just my ideas about this challenge, and then maybe we'll have time for a little bit of discussion. So if your brief is, please make a video about giving directions, and we're going to send that out, but beyond making the video, you don't get any interaction with students at all. That's pretty challenging, but maybe some things that you could do. So I think accurate modeling is important, but it's not everything, obviously. That's just kind of static content. Perhaps there could be a story or a quest. So you can make a video about you finding directions, going somewhere, and perhaps students, their interpretive frame could be about where does she want to go and what does she need. And perhaps I think if we focus on accurate language, we actually lose the possibility of things going wrong. I think if things can go wrong, that starts to activate all kinds of mental processes. So maybe in your video about directions, you could get lost, or you could talk to somebody who's not very trustworthy and they give you bad directions. So that might stimulate some thought processes for students. And if you already have a relationship with your learners who are going to watch the video, maybe you could subvert some expectations or use what you know that they know about you to make some jokes or get them thinking about whether you really want to go somewhere. The most challenging brief, if you can only just make like worksheet or packet content, that's really tough. But I think still you could do some things with framing that as a kind of quest or puzzle, or add another layer that's going to kick off some social and emotional and psychological processes for students. I'm going to skip this because how much time is left? Oh, 3 minutes of the 20 minutes. Okay. I wonder if we could discuss a little bit about what you've missed about physical classrooms during online teaching, if you have done online teaching. And have you had any difficult briefs like the ones I've mentioned? And how did you respond to those? So let me unshare. And there's only a few of us here, so please feel free to unmute and discuss these questions. First, if you were teaching online or remotely, what did you miss about the classroom this year?
I'll go first. That's okay. This year I'm teaching it at a new university in a new city, and all of my students are freshmen and they're the lowest level in the university. So already it's challenging to communicate with them, but not physically being there with them, to me, adds more distance and makes communication even more challenging. And then, at least initially in the spring, so much of what I had to teach them or help them with was technology. So teaching them how to use technology, through English, from a distance, all of that was very, very frustrating. So yeah, just physically being present because I just think it's easier to communicate with people when you're in the same physical space.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just also trying to catch up on the chats. I see the puzzle was confusing. Yeah.
For me, the puzzle was confusing because I framed it in my head as just a simple question to students. Does he like gorillas or not? So I didn't really read it. I assumed that it was a simple, does Bryan like gorillas? Yes or no type of thing. I didn't really read the question.
So Nixon says, I miss sharing the same atmosphere. Did you find any ways to respond to the challenge of being away from not interacting with students physically, Andy?
Me? Well, I used a lot more Japanese in my class for some things because, the point of the class is not how to understand Zoom in English. It's to understand Zoom so that we can do the lesson smoothly. So that's one thing, I guess. I've relied heavily on slides so that I can not only write all of my instructions and points out, but they have a clear record of every class so that if they can't understand it the first time, they can read the slides. Those are two ways that I hope have been helpful for the students.
I also found myself using slides differently. For example, just repeating slides a lot and screenshotting a slide. So if they weren't taking things in on a slide, I would screenshot it and I would just give it to them kind of again and again and say, okay, here's that slide again. And maybe this time you'll notice something else about it. I'm seeing some comments. I miss sharing the same atmosphere. My university covered tech supports. I got really stressed when the connection fluctuates. Yeah, the tech support. So Nixon's saying that there was tech support. I think that's really great. I think everyone was kind of scrambling to deal with the technology this year. And I think that was tech support is great, but I think what didn't happen in a lot of contexts was any kind of pedagogical support. Obviously, if the tech doesn't work, that's a big deal, but at some point we have to get to the pedagogy. So Darren asked, do my students participate more when the camera is off? So my students didn't want to use Zoom, so I actually used a text-based chat room. And so I think maybe that made them more comfortable to participate, but I still think that I ended up developing kind of new beginning of class routines, because if I just kind of launched into content, nothing was happening. It was kind of cold. So I had to find new, not just warm-ups, but new kind of like, okay, class is about to begin. So let's chat, let's find a way to, like wave, and all of those things were important. And the text-based chat room did have things like emojis, and you could put GIFs, and those became very important. So sometimes we were building up those kind of informal connections and joking, and sometimes the 5 minutes before class began were actually the most important, I think. In my school, cannot feel any online pedagogical support. Yes, I feel the same way. In my Korean high school, the focus was very much on get your content ready. We are going to check that you have content. It needs to be going online. It was all content, and it was all just assuming that kind of teacher-centeredness, and the tech support was non-existent, basically. I heavily rely on YouTube now. Yeah, I had to think about whatever I was giving students, I had to try to think about like, what are they actually doing with it? So yeah, short videos are useful in the real classroom. I think online they were useful in a slightly different way, because also things like any kind of image-based stuff was useful, because then we're kind of imagining how each other's reaction. Oh, okay. Yeah, Nixon's asking Darren, were you uploading videos? I think we're about to run out of time.
We have about 1 more minute.
Okay.
So any final questions, final thoughts?
Darren said to everyone, looking forward to having you in my online class here in the Philippines as a guest speaker. That was delivered to everyone, so I think we are all going to the Philippines as guest speakers soon.
Yay!
Virtual.
Okay, well, we're nearly out of time. Thank you, guys, and it was great to have you here, and thanks for doing the little interactive part here at the end. I think I rushed through the presentation a little, but it's always nice to chat. Oh,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Darren.
Can everyone please unmute yourselves and let's give Bryan a round of applause. Thank you.
Okay, I hope I can run into